My name is Rabbanit Alissa Thomas Newborn, and I am a graduate of Yeshivat Maharat, which is the first seminary that's ordaining Orthodox women as clergy. And so I'm very blessed to work at B'nai David Judea with Rabbi Yosef Kanevsky, who I'm sure also many of you have a relationship with. And I have been there for the past 3 years. I have a background separate from my smicha in chaplaincy. I'm a board certified chaplain, and I've worked particularly and had passions for palliative care, end-of-life care, and so I've actually worked in different hospices as well, and in psychiatric care, which has sort of influenced a lot of the work I'm doing around mental health as well. So that's my personal professional background, where I'm coming from. And so today we're going to spend some time discussing why death, why the end of life is such a big part of our davening at the Chagim. It's something that I think we, probably having done this many, many times, are aware of, and it's in our mind that we are thinking about how this is the time we're sealed, whether we're going to live or die. But the fact that death is something that Davka is supposed to be talked about and reflected about at this time of year, I think is worth spending just a little more reflection on. Why is it that we have this almost obligation to face the fact that God can take our lives at any moment, that the liturgy is reminding us that we are fragile, that we are like, this cell over, this passing shadow, that God gives us the privilege just to breathe each day. And the liturgy that most powerfully embodies this, that is the most famous, as we know, is Unatan Tokef, which traditionally there's a beautiful, moving, poignant tradition that it comes from an 11th century Rabbi Amnon, who was known for being martyred for not converting to Christianity. And so the tradition is that he wrote it in the 11th century in Europe, but other archaeological facts that we found from the Cairo Geniza tell us that it was probably from the 6th or 7th century in Israel, potentially by Yanai, who's the first liturgical poet that we know by name. But it's the piece of liturgy that moves us the most around the fact that we are facing our mortality at the Chagim. And I think it is unusual for a religion to focus on our mortality at the new year. At the point at which we are born into this world, we are reminded of the fact that we can die. So I gave you a sheet that has just an excerpt from Unatan Tokef on it. And with the framing, so where I want us to spend our time focusing today, I was asked 3 years ago, it was right before the Chagim, and I'm sure you all have similar stories to this, but a woman came to me in our shul and said, I just found out that my daughter has this diagnosis. I am very, very frightened. I don't know what to do with this information. It's fresh. I don't even know how to be a good parent to her and care for her with this diagnosis that she has. How am I supposed to sit in shul and say Yonatan Tokef? Am I supposed to think that God planned a year ago for her to have a life-threatening diagnosis of an illness? What do I do with that information? She felt like she literally couldn't sit in shul during that tefillah, and she was coming to me asking, can I be there for everything else but step out when we say, mi yichya mi yamut? Do I need to be there for that moment? And that sort of planted a seed for me of, wow, we need to think more of how to even respond in that moment to that person. And of course, I encouraged her to turn those tefillot to God, including her anger and her fear. But I think her question is, there isn't really an answer that's going to fulfill that. How do we sit there? And we each, as clergy, I think, have to feel that in our hearts too, authentically in that moment. So I just wanted to start with that framing, thinking about why are we focusing on death at the beginning of the year? So we're all familiar with this piece from Unatan Tokef, B'Rosh Hashanah Yichatevun, U'Yom Tzom Kippur Yichatevun. And then specifically, mi yichya mi yamut, who's going to live and who's going to die. And we have all of these very descriptive pieces, mi b'mayim, mi ba'esh, who is going to die by water, by fire, by hunger, starvation, by strangulation, all of these different pieces of how we could die, imagining not just the concept of death, but going all the way to the point of how we are going to die, literally imagining our death, that moment, in almost jarring descriptive language. Like, why do we have to spend so much time thinking, is it going to be by water or by fire, and how that applies to my life? And then we get to the famous piece of Utshuva, Tefillah, Tzedakah, Mavirim, and Roah HaGzera, that through Tshuva, Tefillah, and charity, Tzedakah, we are able to overturn the evil within this decree. So just from this text that we know in our Kishkas, what does it tell you about how we should be thinking about death at the Chagim?
It's our companion.
As our companion. Ooh, say more. What do you mean?
That it's an inherent part of our life, that just as we live, so too will we die. So it's not a foreign visitor, it's not a stranger, it is indeed something that is part of our humanity.
Beautiful. So it's not something strange to us, which I think you're also taking it a step further. It's not frightening because it's something we haven't experienced before. It's with us.
I haven't gotten to the fear part yet. But
okay, take it a little further. Yeah. But if it's something that's not other, it's not this thing that's sneaking up on us, we're familiar with it.
Right.
And a companion is a powerful word.
Yeah, coming from a man who works with the geriatric community over there.
That's what I'm saying. Learn more from you.
But it's interesting. I mean, it is Roeg Zera. In that way, it's not a companion. I mean, you want to fight it off. It feels like.
It's actual evil. It's the
right.
worst.
And you want to do whatever you can to fight it off. Right? And it's through action. So don't sit and reflect on it necessarily. But somehow it's through actions that you can, counteract it.
So it's either something that's familiar and companion versus something that is really, you put everything you have in you at this time of year to get rid of it because it is the worst possible outcome.
I was just thinking about it as this idea of companionship, but more specifically like as a counterweight. Like a lot of us sort of, speak about like the frivolity of January 1st. And so to allow Rosh Hashanah or the entire Yamim Noraim not to sort of like descend into this meaninglessness, that a celebration of life can only have true appeal when there's that counterbalance of a recognition of death. And so therefore you pair both of them together, and I think that that's what sort of allows the Chagim to become this sort of rich place of real introspection because of that balance that's offered.
So we wouldn't even be able to appreciate the greatness of Rosh Hashanah if we didn't have that awareness that life is not a given.
Right.
I love that comparison with January 1st.
Yeah.
So I think that what's being said here is that people die.
Mm-hmm.
That in itself is not evil, it's just true. People die. And because we know people die, then how you live becomes absolutely critically important. And there are things that we can do to mitigate, not that people die, but to make the truth of death less evil. The decree is the decree, people die. We can soften the harshness of that through however we understand Tshuva, Tefillah, and Tzedakah.
So you're sort of combining those two pieces of it being this is a part of life. It's not a bad thing, but the Roa Gzera, the thing that we would overturn that would be evil, would be how we would be living.
There's no. The Gzera is the Gzera, right?
Okay.
The decree is the decree. We can change how we experience the truth of our death by building community, by doing tshuva, it's interesting. Last night we had first of our death over dinner things in the congregation, and one of the congregants said, I love Temple Emmanuel, but how come you don't really force us to deal with the fact that this is about we're gonna someday die? You make it too nice.
Sugarcoat it.
And I mean, and it's even more than this. It's that on Yom Kippur you're dead. You are, you don't eat, you don't drink, you don't. I mean, we are rehearsing our death. And he said, the challenge with Reform Judaism is that you don't do it well enough. You don't make us really face the fact that we're going to die. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I heard the criticism.
What do you do with the word Roa? Is that like the perception we have of it that's false?
it is what it is, but it can be made more, the truth of our finitude can be made more, can be softened by how we deal with
How we
building
live.
community, how we live, and we all know that it's true that after a horrible death, what makes people able to survive is that there's shiva, there's community, there's people bringing food, there's, the forgiveness that has happened before. I mean, all that stuff. I think that's what's being said.
That's such a powerful thing, because you're saying it's in the context of death that we can find closure and connection through these three pieces, but that's also something we're acting out at Yom Kippur, almost so we're ready, as your congregant was saying. 1, 2.
Ruach Torah could also be the first one in which you actually confront that reality.
Mm-hmm.
That is, we all feel like, oh my God. And then the question is, what do you do with that death sentence? Right? And everybody, I just had with somebody who was dying yesterday, and so the question is, and I always wonder, how would I handle it myself? So I don't think there's so few people who say, oh, this is a good thing I got that death sentence. Right? Diagnosed with cancer or something else. But I think that's our immediate response. And then I think maybe the challenge of, so what do you do with that? And then, of course, we all translate into how do you live each day as a blessing? I mean, that's clear.
Except we all have that death sentence. We just don't know
Right.
when it's happening.
Of course it is. Right. We live as if we're immortal. But but this forces us to confront that mortality. I mean, that's obviously what this is about.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. It's making us face it, but it is giving us the tools to respond. It's not just,
Correct.
and we all die.
Right.
Now what do you do with it? Yes, and then
Well, yeah, you haven't spoken.
you can go first. Please, yeah, deferring to you.
I'm a hospice rabbi, among other things. And I'm really touched, Rabbi, by the idea that you're softening the decree for the survivors. Because the prayer is most often understood as run away from death by doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
But this is live with death, which you already have in your life, the people who are dying that you know, by incorporating these things in your life.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Such a perfect. And then we'll come back, yeah.
Stuart, my much smarter fellow graduate from Taft High School.
Now we're going back.
It wasn't last week, but that said something that yet again as he often does, said something that makes me think. I've never associated the word evil with death. I don't know if that's something you wanted to explore this morning. I want to take us down an alleyway you didn't want to go to.
No, I mean, I think it's a question to be raised. I honestly don't think I have a good answer, but I think yeah, I mean, it's there. And it's not that it's roa hagzera. It is of the decree, meaning
Right.
It's not synonymous with, it's a part of it that we might see in it as well.
We're commanded, we're told to constantly choose life. I get that aspect. I just, thinking of death as evil is now one that I hadn't really put into my toolbox. And now I'm wondering if I should have a compartment for it.
Interesting, very interesting. Yeah, I think you can do
Okay,
it
well,
first.
I'm
Take two more
also a
questions.
hospice rabbi, and I don't quite see it so, I hate to use the term black and white. The phrase that I always focus on, who shall be at peace and who pursued? I think what this prayer does is define an evil and a non-evil approach to the decree. We're all going to die, but are you going to die at peace, or are you going to die in panic and fear? Because the guys I'm working with, usually they're mostly men, are dying, and many of them are terrified of what's coming next. So I think that if they feel that they can avert an unpleasant death, a painful, emotionally painful death, because obviously they're dying, that's a good thing. And there is comfort in prayer, and there is comfort in saying, I forgive,
Right.
and dealing with family issues and such. So there's a way of saying, I am going to be one who dies, I hate to use the term, a good death.
That's a great
but
term.
not,
Use that
but
term.
not by evil
Yeah.
decree, but dealing with what I have to deal with. And much of my work is helping them deal with those things.
Right.
Don't you find that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I think it also, I mean, what's coming up is, is death a punishment? Is death evil? Is death, a lot of, we see in patients, in congregants, that a lot of people relate to death as a punishment or an illness as a punishment. And I think that a lot of the people sitting in shul on the Chagim read this in that way.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
I'm
that's
reading these
true.
words. If I'm really good for the next 10 days, then I won't have a bad year.
No matter how many sermons you preach about this over a lifetime,
Yeah.
That will still happen.
they don't hear that.
But I don't see death as a punishment. I just see it as a very sad, missed opportunity.
Yes.
Like, a friend dies at 48. Like, she's not being punished, but she just doesn't get to see her kids graduate from high school and get married and become an old lady. I mean, that's not a punishment. It's just a really many missed experiences.
So I want to add to that, and then I want us to look at the Eish Kodesh real quick. But I want to tell you about, I run this weekly support group. It's a mental wellness support group called Briut HaNefesh. It's meant for people who are pursuing mental wellness in different forms, and including people with mental illnesses or caring for those with mental illnesses, or people who just want to be a little bit mentally healthier in whatever way. And what we've been focusing on leading up to the Chagim is this concept of ambiguous loss, which Chaplain Linda Golding in New York, whom I worked with, has really spent a lot of time building up and speaking about, and I learned it from her. But the idea is mourning things that are a loss, sometimes not even death, but I think that does come into this too, in terms of mourning the things that have died over the past year, that we've lost over the past year. And what we've been doing is we have 7 weeks leading up to Yom Kippur in the sessions we've had together. So we've been sitting Shiva for something that we've had a loss for. For example, someone sitting Shiva for a relationship, sitting Shiva, using that language, one day each week in our group of a relationship with a parent that is just not something that can be fixed or fulfilled in the way that she dreamed. Or, the relationship with someone like what you're describing of in not being able to have X, Y, and Z thing. So I think that for us, we think of death with this language. It's very clear. It's like, who is going to die by fire? It's very physical. But I think it also is an opportunity for us to reflect on those things that are losses for ourselves or losses for our community that can be mourned. And it's part of the closing of that chapter of the past year as well.
Ambiguous loss is the term.
Yes.
Has she written about this anywhere?
She's in the process of writing something right now. But I would love to put you in touch with her. I think you would get along with her really well. She'd love to talk to you.
But if we Google it, we won't find anything.
There's some books in psychology around ambiguous loss, but not necessarily in terms of spiritual care yet. So she's working on that now.
I just have to ask you a question. I don't know if Laura mentioned this earlier.
Yeah.
The second half of the entire talk isn't necessarily talking about death.
Right. It's talking about
Life.
life.
Was that raised already or not?
No.
So like, and also you're like what always happens. You're looking.
I just wasn't going to cut it out, but yeah.
No. Like I've read this, right? Laura, how many times have we read this, right? The second part is not about it. So my question is, right? One can understand the second part as being, God can also ordain for those things, right? Separate from death, or the second part could it be how you confront death? You can either confront it with rest or to wander, to be at peace or to feel you're
Right, that's
pursued,
what she was saying.
to be serene or feel tormented, to feel you've actually led an impoverished life or a life of wealth. I mean, have you?
How do you look back?
Have you looked at
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that,
What do you
I
do with
think
that
we
second
normally,
part?
again, think about it in a very physical way, but I do think that that's what you were getting at, is that this can be a framework for how we actually respond to those moments.
Right.
And you were describing that you had patients that some of them are, it's like they're being strangled at the end of life because of their emotional
Absolutely.
experience.
Using it as a metaphor, not as
Exactly, yeah. And I think, I think it would be, for that woman who came to me struggling with, my daughter has this terrible diagnosis, how do I say these words? I don't think that, for her, it's not helpful to look at this as a physical thing of, last year God said, I'm going to give your daughter this terrible diagnosis. But I do think that exploring it as a metaphor in terms of her relationship with God and bringing her pain to God is something that would be much more helpful and also allow her to sit in those pews. So I want to be mindful of time, though I feel like I could have this conversation with you forever. The Eish Kodesh is the Warsaw Ghetto Rebbe, Rabbi Klonimus Kalmi Shapira. He brings in, during his Shabbat Shuvah drasha, this notion of Rabbi Akiva's death as a martyr. And so I'll just sort of go through it quickly. So there's a Mishnah in Masechet Yoma where Rabbi Akiva says, Ashreichem Yisrael, you should be happy, you should rejoice, Israel. Lifnei mi atem mitarin, before whom are you made pure? Umi metzaheretchem, who purifies you? Avichem shebashamayim, it's your Father in heaven. And so in trying to understand what this is, the Eish Kodesh says, we know Rabbi Akiva, he was someone who his whole life wanted to figure out how to live uv'chol nafshecha, living with all of your soul. He understood it as afilu notel et nafshecha, like even if God takes your soul. And so he says the bottom line that the Eish Kodesh gives us is that what Rabbi Akiva, someone who was martyred, what he was trying to tell us in Ashreichem Yisrael, that we should be happy with the fact that God is the one who purifies us. Think of like tahara and death. So he says, when you have an awareness that God is the one who is pulling the strings, so to say, which is what a lot of Inotantoka is getting at as well, you can get to this point in your suffering, in your struggle, when you're turning to God and saying, why is this happening? Az hargashotechem mitbatlot einchem margishim et hayasarim. You get to this point where your feelings, your suffering, you no longer feel, your pain is gone. ועוד זאת שאתם גומרים שמי מטהר אתכם אביכם שבשמיים, אביכם דייקה, כאב שמבטל את כעסו לטובות, בנו כן הוא יתברך עושה כל למענכם, וממילא כל הדינים מתבטלים כנזכר לעיל. So he says that what happens when we sit and we have this davening experience around Inotan Tokaf and other liturgy like it, is that we begin to separate the feeling, right? You're talking about like Yom Kippur is something where we're reenacting our death by not eating. We're not physically feeling in that same way. We get to this point where we are reflecting so much on God that we don't feel our suffering in the same way, and that allows God to step in as our Father and have compassion on us. So from what he's saying, I think the takeaway of the Eish Kodesh is that this liturgy is an opportunity for us to experience death without entirely experiencing it, so that God acts to us as a father, so that God is able to step in and save us in some way, which is a very different way of looking at why we say this. Sorry, you've had your hand up.
Well, the Eish Kodesh is a very unusual man.
Yes.
The rabbi of the Warsaw Ghetto, he dies in the ghetto. In his works, he never mentions the Germans once. And I think what's fascinating is even in your suffering, you can rejoice when you remember before whom you are purified. I think his words become that much more amazing when we consider who he was and where the horror that he saw of his whole family dying in the bombing of Warsaw and fighting for the ghetto, and then he finally dies in the ghetto. And all of his works survived him amazingly enough. I think his words really hit me very hard.
He's by far one of my absolute favorite people to turn to, because he has this this emunah that I can't even possibly imagine in the place and the reality in which he's living, but he's also honest about the struggle. He's not denying it or saying that it's always for the good per se. He often, and he goes through this journey in his writings as well, of saying, God, you need to step in while we're suffering. Which is part of what he's doing right here is, yes, we're saying, we are putting ourselves before God as angels, but we want God to step in and not give us loss. We want God to have rachamim on us and be our Father. And we say throughout our liturgy that God is our Father in that way. So thank you. It's so important to know his background. So, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm curious with all this considered, so I'm curious as to what with that woman who approached you with her daughter. And like, what was, like, you know, what happened?
Oh, what happened with her? So we spent a lot of time reflecting together on how she could translate what she was feeling into her tefillah, how she could come to God and say, I'm angry with you, and I'm struggling with this. And to also reframe it not as a punishment or as God causing illness and suffering in her life, which I think, in the Orthodox community, I think it varies in every community, but definitely in the Orthodox community we see a lot of the black and white, like the very literal thinking, which is sometimes extraordinarily helpful, but sometimes it makes it crippling. Because if you really believe that God's writing you in the book of life right now, which I do, but what do I do with that? How then? So I think we every year come back to that tension. So I joined her in that struggle and reflected on how it could be part of her prayers and crossing that threshold. But I think about it all the time because I still.
Was the Eish Kodesh helpful to her?
I didn't have it at the time.
Uh-huh.
So this was 3 years ago. I'm curious what you would say.
I mean, maybe this is a cop-out, so like I like Laura's, or maybe my earlier comment. I don't read it literally. And so I don't know if that's, we could psychoanalyze that and, you all have your own. So I just don't read it literally. And my conception of God is different, so it just doesn't arise. And I'm not sure why that is, but it's another topic.
Yeah, well, I would like to believe that we can hold both. That it doesn't, and this person in particular happens to be someone who thinks very black and white. So for her, it was earth-shattering for me to say, no, God didn't cause this. That was like, well, then God doesn't exist.
Right.
That was those were the stakes. But I would like to believe that we could hold all of it.
I was just thinking, the other part of this is you're written in the book of life, but you have free will. And the question is, how do you balance those two things? And we're told exactly how to balance it with repentance, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So it is giving you that other way of looking at it. Yeah, Laura.
It doesn't say that God is writing.
So it's passive.
It only says some of us are going to be dead next year, and that's true. But it doesn't say that God is doing it. My first read of this Eish Kodesh was to be angry at it, and then as I listened to you, I actually think that it is profoundly comforting in the sense that we suffer, not like he suffered, but there's suffering in our lives. And the idea that if you can just make space in the suffering and see if there is an invitation to experience the loving love of, a loving father or mother, even in that suffering. Whoa, that's so where is your congregant going to find in this horrible news about it's her daughter, for God's sake? It's not an old mother, it's her daughter. How horrible is that? But the idea that, in suffering, is it possible for us to open our hearts and feel divine compassion, and that will somehow help us with the suffering? Not that God chose it for us. I think
that God is with us.
I think that's the difference. Anyway, I would not have read the text the way you suggested, so thank you for that.
I appreciate the honesty and the journey that you had with the text. I love that. And then we'll move on.
So
I
was planning to do a High Holiday sermon on this anyway, and I've been reading a book called A Year to Live by Stephen Miller, in which he envisioned that he was going to die in a year and meditated on that deliberately. And one thing that he says in there that really struck me was,
enjoy Ramah.
That we're all actually very grateful that we die. No one wants to live forever. No one wants to watch everyone else die. And no one would want to have to live a life where we have to shoulder the consequences of everything we do forever. We need to be able to take risks, and we need to have free choice. if you know, every bump and bruise was going to stay with me for a million years, you know, how protective would I be about my life, and how would I not really be living?
No, I'm going to show you a text in English that is similar, I think, to what you're saying, but I think that's sort of like the Havamina of all of this is, you know, if we didn't have death as a part of our liturgy, would we really be able to live? And that is what you're saying, that we probably wouldn't be living to our fullest. We certainly wouldn't be reflecting as deeply as we are right now in our davening, because it would be, as you said, like all simcha, all, you know, sukkos, like that's what we're in, which we know, of course, when we have this chiyuv to be happy at Sukkot, which comes immediately after all this. A lot of people find that really hard. How am I supposed to be happy all the time? And, you know, I've had patients who had, you know, they were in the hospital with their parent dying while they're supposed to be happy, and like, what do you do with those emotions? So I do think that complexity of what you're talking about, and the fact we almost need the finitude in order to live fully. So I want to hold on to that. If you turn to the back, Gesher Chaim, Rabbi Yechiel Tukachinsky, he wrote I'm sure you're aware, a really wonderful resource on Avelut. So, you know, I was making a shiva call in a yeshivish home a few weeks ago, and, you know, someone who was sitting shiva turned to the rabbi and was like, I don't know how to do this, like, what do I do? I've never sat shiva before, I don't know where to turn. And he was like, Gesher Chaim. So that's, you know, this is sort of the place that we go to, you know, for like the condensed everything.
Tell us his name again.
Rabbi Yechiel Tukachinsky. He wrote the Sefer in end of the 19th century, early 20th century. So it's just it's a compilation of our halacha around end of life, in every step of the way. But I wanted to point this out because I think it, you know, I'm sure, again, it may be something you've thought of before, but this is something that really touches my heart, is that our practice when a person dies in Vidui is to say Shema Yisrael once, which is what we have here. Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, Shoshav Hamim, B'lachash, we say those words 3 times, and then we say Hashem Hu Elokim 7 times, and then we end Hashem Melech, Hashem Melech, Hashem Melech Le'olam Va'ed once.
Just like after Ne'ilah.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. I never knew that.
I never knew.
Oh, yeah.
That is huge.
It is sort of like the thesis of we are dying.
Wow.
We experience.
Here we go.
It's the vidu.
Let's go.
It's with the exception, interestingly, the last line, because here's this halacha of what we're doing, Hashem Melech, that piece is not in our Ne'ilah. We end just with the 7 times of Hashem Hu Elokim. But we still have this, I mean, it's not a mistake that this is the same structure.
Wow.
That we are dying in this whole process. And it's almost as if starting with Elul, you know, we do the Cheshbon Nefesh, we really reflect, and then we get to this point where at the apex of that Ne'ilah part, we die, and then we're reborn, Simchat Torah, with the Torah as well. Sorry, go ahead.
It's Sharim, it's gates.
Beautiful.
In both cases, it's gates closing. We're closing the day, we're closing the chapter. Like I got it.
The image.
Beautiful. It's beautiful. It's I think one thing I really like about Judaism, there's a lot of things, but in addition to them all, is that we recognize that it moves forward. It moves forward.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that at arguably one of the holiest moments of the year, the gates close, but then we have this joyous holiday that follows right after it.
I was just saying, Laura, for people interested, I think Yitzhak Greenberg, I want to say, wrote quite a bit on this. I forget in his book, The Way.
Uh-huh.
I want to say
The Jewish
that
Way?
I think he outlines this.
It's definitely not a coincidence.
No.
So along the lines of what we were speaking about before, of how death can be an opportunity to live more fully, Kalev Ben-Dor, who is someone who writes for Haaretz in Israel, wrote a reflection on having his own diagnosis and living in the Yasser Yimei Tshuva, and how he reflected on Yonatan HaTokef. So I just wanted to show you his reflection, because I think it's something that we all really relate to. Would you mind reading for us, Laura?
Yet perhaps most potent is that the Yonatan HaTokef prompts us to think about death, something we generally feel uncomfortable with, certainly when we consider our own. In her book, The Midst of Life, The former British nurse Jennifer Worth describes a deep-seated social taboo and a climate of denial surrounding the subject, arguing that it's almost impossible to speak about. Her ideas are echoed by Stephen Jenkinson, founder of the Orphan Wisdom School, who refers to the Western world as suffering from death phobia and grief illiteracy, an absence of language for how it feels to be dying. Jenkinson argues that this is problematic because it's the awareness of death and not happiness or positivity or stoicism that allows us to live fully in the time we have. If we think there will always be more time down the road, we put off both our dreams and our obligations.
Which is exactly what you're
Excellent.
saying.
Quoting Jenkinson.
Yeah. I was like, whoa. But I mean, I love that language of grief illiteracy because we really do. We live as if we were immortal. We don't talk about this. We put the dead the dead and the dying in separate buildings. It is something that we have really made taboo, and we're all aware of this in our work. But I think countercultural as Judaism always is, and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs talks about that counterculture all the time in beautiful ways. Here we are, still, we are not going to let death be something that's not a part of the holiest days of our year. We are not willing to say that we're not going to talk about it. And I think that this language here shows us that it actually, especially because we're people living in America, we're not just living in this shtetl mindset. We also carry that baggage with us. We're all uncomfortable talking about death, which is why these death cafes are popping up. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Conversation Project, but it's a similar idea that Bezrat Hashem we hope to do at our synagogue this coming year. But it's really an opportunity to sit down and think about what your death would be like, and to say what you want to happen at your death, not just a DNR or something like that, but actually, is there a certain song that you would like to hear on your deathbed? Are there certain people you definitely want there?
Or you don't want there.
Or that you really don't want there under any circumstances, right? Or that you need to say you're sorry to before you get to that point where you can't communicate anymore. And this, I'll just say personally, when I did that practice of reflecting on it, I found it so liberating. I didn't even realize, I was having that conversation in the Conversation Project, and I started to cry because I didn't even realize for myself how much I needed to, my mom, I needed to hear my mom singing. That was what I wanted in that moment. But there's definitely a notion of, in our society of not talking about these things, but we're starting to build up to and get closer, and as we know, Judaism is always there a step ahead.
So a resource that maybe we don't all know about is Death Over Dinner, which is a national project like the Conversation Project, not Jewish. IKAR got a grant from the Jewish Community Foundation to create a Jewish resource for Death Over Dinner. So you can go to Death Over Dinner Jewish edition, and it has all kinds of resources for how to have these dinners. So last night at our house, we're part of this project, we had 8 people, and you choose an intention, you send them some of these Jewish readings, there's a video, there's a it's a thoughtful project. Can be led by lay people, not by necessarily rabbis or trained therapists. But the point is there's all these resources there. It's worth checking out. The Conversation Project is not Jewish. This piece that IKAR hired some Jewish educator to get some of these materials together. Some of them are good, some of them could be better.
Yeah.
And it would be good to send them some of these texts because, anyway, so Death Over Dinner, Jewish edition.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
And while I still have the floor, Larry Hoffman's book about the Unatana Tokef is part of his High Holiday series, a series of really good essays about the Unatana Tokef. So, Aviva, for your sermon, it's a good resource.
Thank you. Thank you so much for adding in those resources. I do think that the conversations around end of life, especially, I'm trying to engage young professionals in this. Because usually young professionals think, it's about my grandparents, which is important. It's a very important thing to process that. But it's a life-changing experience to really reflect on these things when it's not present in your life, because it brings up different values and makes us reflect and be more present in the ways that you were describing before. So, like my husband and I both, we have our advanced care directives, you know, and we're 28, like why would we have that? But we've actually had these conversations, and so I think it's important, and it's scary, and it's really uncomfortable, and I hate it every time my mom says, like, I'm going out of town, you know, the jewelry is in this place, and the bank account, I'm like, I don't want to hear it. But at the same time, these are conversations that bring us closer together, and I think that's part of the reason why we're supposed to think about it at the Chagim, is it brings us closer to each other, but also to God. So in our last very few minutes, I just wanted to point out something from Rabbi Talishkin. He speaks about the kitzel, which is, you know, another visual reminder of death as a burial garment. And he makes a beautiful point that what it does is reminds us that we're mortal in a visual way, not just ourselves. So far we've been really speaking of more of an internal process. But as someone mentioned, I don't remember who, that it's also thinking about the others around us and that they're not going to be here forever. And that instills a different kind of gratitude, I think, of looking around and seeing others wearing a kitzel. Interestingly, he does speak about a man wearing a kitzel, but in the paragraph earlier on that I didn't have room to give you, he does say, but I don't see why a woman can't. So,
Do you?
just personally no, but I do wear all white.
You do.
So I feel like I'm in that white cloak.
Mode.
What?
That mode.
Yeah, that mode, exactly.
I actually had one made for myself.
Oh, did
It's got a lace collar.
Beautiful. So does that be
I will
like
wear
feminine lace piece. That's why I like that. But he ends by saying, by spending the high holidays in one's burial shroud, one in effect is always confronting the question posed by Hillel, if not now when, which really goes back to what we were speaking of before in terms of fully living. So I just wanted to end with another piece from Gesher Chaim, which is a practice that some tzaddikim have of washing the hands of the dead right before death. And the argument is, he says, is because as we came into this world, we should leave this world. And I think that that's in a very physical way, very real, but also when we think of the Chagim for ourselves, the way that we're leaving this world, we're also going into the world, and there's that ongoing cycle of life that, of course, that we mentioned before is part of our calendar. But it's also, I think, a reminder of hope, of life, of something meaningful and vital coming out of these reflections.
That moment of washing is before a person dies.
Not after?
It's when the language here is Behit Karev Haketz, like when the end is coming. But usually you're not
death?
there. Usually people aren't there at the exact moment someone dies, so they'll do it like right after. But it depends.
Right.
Yeah, so they'll do it.
I'm
before.
often there when they're literally pulling the plug.
Okay, so
then would you do this, do you think, before?
That's gotta be hard.
What?
After the plug?
After the plug?
I know some people have, I've heard of some rabbis having the practice of, like after the person dies, bringing in some water and doing something along those lines. The halacha is also to open a window to let the soul out, but this is more of like a physical cleansing.
Right.
I'm sure, if that wasn't actually something that's possible. This isn't like a...
No, I understand.
This
I
is
just,
like
I just tried
that's not
to incorporate it.
Yeah, but I'm sure that something with Purell, if you're in hospital
Yeah,
setting or hospital setting,
I like
it
that.
could be
Yeah.
that cleansing, even of yourself on behalf of that
Oh,
person. So it's, I don't know, I love that too. But so my prayer is that with, this conversation will really feel like going into our Chagim, that we'll be more present to our own death, in that it helps us be present to our own lives and how we're serving those people, whether it's in hospice, hospital, synagogue settings, in our families or in our own lives, our own circles, that when we are encountering those moments of fragility and liminality, that we can also draw closer to each other and have connection and holiness. Yasher Koach, thank you so much for being together.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.